Jesus cured blindness. People don't like it when mortals perform miracles. We've got godlike technology, but we got very mortal brains. We haven't had a sort of an upgrade to our operating system in a couple million years, and our biology has not kept pace with our technology, and this is creating significant problems. Abundance itself brings with it a bunch of problems that we could talk about, and our cognitive operating system is just not up to the task just yet.
You're watching the Financial Sense News Hour, financial news for high net worth investors and strategists. When it comes to the biggest investment trends and understanding the market, we've been delivering the insights you need for over 30 years.
Joining us on the show today is Steven Kotler. He's the co-author, along with Peter Diamandis, of a new book called We Are as Gods, a survival guide for the age of abundance, and basically making the case that we are living in an age of miracles, going through a number of very specific examples with the various technologies, the companies that we see today. But Steven, I want to harken back. The last time we spoke with you was actually 10 years ago on the book Bold, and we were talking about the exponential growth of technologies. And I remember you and I were talking in depth about that, specifically on artificial intelligence, and how you and I were believing that we were going to see a massive impact from AI on society. Of course, this was well before the era of ChatGPT. And I think for your average listener listening to what we said 10 years ago about your book, they probably thought we were crazy. And yet here we are now in the age of miracles, as you discuss in your latest book.
It's a wild transition, if you think about it. Bold was the second book in the series. Abundance was the first. It was written in 2012. Or it came out in 2012. It was probably written in 10 and 11. And in it, we said, hey, there are these 10 exponential technologies, these 10 technologies accelerating in exponential growth curves. And we think they're going to give us the ability to meet and exceed the basic needs of every man, woman, and child on the planet, which is what we called abundance. And at the time, the term abundance made people hostile. The ideas made people hostile. The Wall Street Journal did a backlash article against the ideas. In fact, even when Peter Diamandis, my co-author, opened TED talking about abundance, the guy who came up afterwards was a huge skeptic and basically naysayed everything Peter said. And what's funny about the new book, as you probably noticed, is when we open the book, it opens, before you even get to the book, there's, I think, 4 pages of quotes of world leaders, business leaders, and thought leaders, and world leaders all using the term abundance, talking about it. And they're doing it because it has been a legitimate transition, right? We have ended up with godlike technology, and along the way, we have created tremendous abundance. And people hear that now, everybody's very pessimistic about the world, but just the numbers are sort of startling. Since abundance to today, since 200 million people have moved out of extreme poverty. It's the largest poverty reduction in history. 1 billion people gained access to electricity. 2 billion gained access to safe drinking water. And if you're measuring the spread of communications technology, communications abundance, and computing technology via smartphones, we went from about 1 billion of them in 2012 to 7, maybe 8 billion, depending on whose numbers you trust, today. And if you look at value density, so you measure all the stuff you get for free inside today's smartphone versus, by the way, the smartphone we had back in 2000. So what are all the features that come built in, right? And how much are they actually worth if you were to buy them separately? The world, just through smartphones, gained an increase of $7.3 million per person per smartphone in value density, measuring all the things that it does for free for us that we would have had to pay for 25 years ago. That's incredible. Along the way, as you pointed out, we have also gotten godlike technology. We don't use the biblical terms, right? Nobody's talking about omniscience or omnipresence, but everybody knows we've got ChatGPT, right? And Google. This is sort of omniscience. It's very, very close. Omniscience may know some stuff and doesn't probably hallucinate the way ChatGPT does, but you get my point. Omnipresence, we've got. It's Zoom, it's FaceTime chat, take your pick. Even the nut stuff, creation ex nihilo, which is creation from nothing, right? We've got transgenic animals. We've got synthetic biology. We're literally bringing species back from the dead, right? We're de-extincting species. These are creation miracles. You can sort of go on and on. The one that really sits with me, and then I'll shut up, but the one that really sort of blows my mind, because it's one I was in the room in 2000. It was a Wired magazine cover story when the very first bionic eye turned on. And I remember the inventor, William DeBell, was really nervous. He was nervous about the press being there. And I said to him, I was like, what are you so nervous about? He's like, looks at me and he said, Jesus cured blindness. People don't like it when mortals perform miracles. And it just stayed with me. It was such a powerful statement. It caught me, right? And it caught me also because if you actually know the biblical story, they use Jesus's curing blindness as proof in like religious court that he's actually, a Messiah. And so it's actually like a biblical proof. The technology I saw was a one-off. Like William DeBell died. The inventor of the technology, it worked. The blind could see. Saw a blind guy drive a car around a parking lot. 2 days after the technology was turned on, it was amazing. I also saw the same man have a massive grand mal seizure and nearly die in my arms before that happened. So like I saw both sides of like, this goes wrong, this can go right, and they both nearly happened. And then the inventor died and the technology went away. And we talk about a technology created by Max Hodak, who was he left Elon Musk's Neuralink. I think he got as frustrated with Musk's sort of deception of the truth around neurotechnology as I did. And he founded a new company called the Science Corporation, and he took all of Neuralink's stuff, upgraded it, and has built a retinal implant. And it works, and it's coming on the market, and it targets macular degeneration. It's the number one cause of blindness in the world. 170 million people have macular degeneration. That is a miracle of biblical proportion. There's no, like, you can't, like, I don't know what else you would call that. So the final thing I will say is what I think the most of the book is about is, okay, we've got godlike technology, but we got very mortal brains. We haven't had a sort of an upgrade to our operating system in a couple million years, and our biology has not kept pace with our technology, and this is creating significant problems. Abundance itself brings with it a bunch of problems that we could talk about, and our cognitive operating system is just not up to the task just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to show the book here as well. There it is. Hopefully it shows up. Put it in front of my face. There we go.
We are as gods.
We Are as Gods. So I've got the book here. Fascinating, fascinating book. And I was really surprised. I was expecting along the lines of abundance and bold, again, speaking with you about bold 10 years ago, that this would be a book about exponential technology, of course. And like, as you just laid out, it starts out talking about all the miracles that were done in the Bible. You classify them, you categorize them, and then you show all of the miracles that we're doing today with very specific technologies, very specific companies that are essentially replicating each of those very same miracles in the Bible. So, I mean, it's not just
By the
a
way,
metaphor.
this shouldn't surprise you. Like, it shouldn't surprise anybody, because if you think about it, so there's this line in the Bible that we use for the opens abundance, where there is no vision, people perish. What people sort of forget is that we're a goal-directed machine. Humans are goal-directed machines. And you give us a vision, we will aim in that direction, which is why so many of the technologies we're seeing show up in the world today showed up in Star Trek first. Star Trek gave us the original vision, sci-fi layered it in. And literally, if you walk around the tech companies and talk to the top innovators, where did you get your ideas? They're coming out of fiction, out of movies, out of books, definitely out of the Bible, right? Like, one way or another, there's sort of no way to escape the influence of the holy, not just the Bible, but the holy books on our consciousness and on how we're inventing things into the future. So it's not actually surprising, because we've always used literature as and film and whatnot as a targeting system for things we're inventing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you do talk about why we have such an obsession with superheroes. And it's interesting because, given what you just said, I was reminded of one movie in particular. It's Avengers Age of Ultron. If you want to talk about a movie that draws upon biblical imagery, that is the one. I mean, it is just so profound in terms of drawing on the creation of Vision being this messianic figure who says, I am that I am, essentially. I mean, it's just like taken directly from the Bible. But you talk about that in terms of why. So and that was a really fascinating part of your book on the
Oh,
superhero
thank you.
fascination.
Yeah, thank you. This is something I've been looking at, in my work on human performance and my work as a neuroscientist, um, for a while, because it's really interesting to me. So when we are confronted with complexity of any kind, right, the brain wants to decode it. So the first tool the brain always reaches for is analogy, metaphor. This thing is like this thing. And a lot of people, Hofstadter most famously in Goldratt Bach, but a lot of other people, and actually Hofstadter wrote a book about it. Analogy is considered the foundation of thinking and intelligence and creativity.
Well, didn't
But
Jesus use parables too?
right, Jesus used parables. There's a problem though. We have godlike technology, right? We have godlike technology in our frickin' pockets, and there is really no simple comparison for godlike technology in our pockets. It just analogies start to fall apart in the face of modern technology. When analogies fall apart, and this is what's so interesting, the first thing we do is turn to archetypes, right? This is how we take something that's complex and reduce it to something that's complicated. And if you measure the rise of archetypes in media by counting like superheroes in, as you talked about the Avengers, superheroes in films and television, gods, and that sort of stuff. Since 1970, the birth of the computer age, there's a 10x rise in archetypal storytelling. When archetypes fail, right, when we can no longer slot things into those categories and stuff is still not making sense, we turn to the apocalypse, right? This is the complicated reduced to the simple. It's binary. We're either going to have a utopia or we're going to have an apocalypse. And you see this, by the way, all over the AI. This is the AI discussion today. Nobody is looking at the middle path, except perhaps me and a handful of other people. And everybody's in the extremes. And if you are measuring from the birth of the computer age to now, we also see a 10x rise in apocalyptic storytelling. These kinds of stories are on exponential growth curves because our brain basically can't handle the world we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah, that was such an interesting part of your book, and, it goes into some Jungian philosophy archetypes, of course, but, that's just so interesting and connecting the dots in ways that I've never, seen other people do. So that's what, I think, we are as gods drawing together so many of these different insights. Let's move on to some of the specific. You did talk about them already in terms of giving sight to the blind, but what are some of the most impressive companies or examples of technology that you think really showcase the idea that we're living in an age of miracles today?
Well, I mean, take your pick on, of LLMs, right? The most astounding sign of abundance is an abundance of intelligence, right? And we make the point in the book, and there's a point Peter loves. This is Peter's point more than mine. He loves to make it, but he's right, which is just consider this as a thought experiment. If I came to you 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I said, "Hey, there's this technology. It's coming. It's going to be able to answer any question you pose in some viable way. It's going to be able to write pretty well. Won't replace writing, but it's going to be able to really up your productivity, up your thinking." If I were to, just talk about all the things that AI is currently doing, in order to ask you, how much would you pay for this technology, or how much do you think this technology, or who would have access to it? It would come with a huge price tag. Only the very elite would have access to it. Nobody would ever guess this technology is essentially free. It's the cost of electricity, and that's a significant cost. Don't minimize that at all. But nobody is being charged for that, essentially. And that's kind of amazing. And so take your pick of the companies. I don't know where you want to look at, and I think it's an interesting economy. And, there's a lot of predictions now that it's either going to be a Google or an Apple based market, even though those aren't the names that we hear most frequently. And I don't know enough about kind of techno market economics to lean into that prediction or not, other than just to say that's what I've been hearing a lot this week in AI news. Suddenly Apple's back in the conversation. Everybody's like, oh no, they're coming with their secrets. And I'm like, okay, maybe. We'll see. It's all funny to me, but I think those are great examples. And the one I really love the most, we mentioned it earlier, is Colossal Biosciences. So this is Ben Lamb and George Church, and it's de-extinction. And this is so interesting to me. One, for two different reasons. One, we are bringing species back to the dead, and I've always said that if you're looking for how do Peter and I divide up our books, we usually come into the books trying to solve different problems, right? And that's what happened here, and I could talk about that if you're curious. But we also come in with areas of expertise. My areas are neuroscience and the environment. I have always been trying to help plants, animals, and ecosystems. Peter's expertise is in exponential technology, a little bit more on the company side of this, though we've both been entrepreneurs for forever at this point. But that's sort of, and he wants to help people. And so I've been looking at, nature stressors and species die-off rates that are, we've got an abundance of energy. And as a result, we've now got abundance of species die-off rates because of carbon in the atmosphere, or we've got an abundance of, housing and, species habitat fragmentation. Take your pick on the ills that destroyed the environment. But so de-extinction mattered a lot to me. And it is so sci-fi. We are bringing species back from the dead.
It's Jurassic Park.
It's not Jurassic Park because it's not dinosaurs. You can't actually get dinosaur DNA out of a mosquito, right? Like it doesn't work. Like the Jurassic Park theory doesn't work. So
But
basically,
woolly
they said
mammoths?
until woolly mammoths are coming back, but they're also very hybrids, right? They're 2/3 elephant hatched together with woolly mammoth, but they're new old species. But there was a reason for this. Like originally, if you look at an ecosystem, at the top of an ecosystem is what is known as usually it's a keystone predator or a keystone species. And in the Arctic, which stores most of our carbon in tundra, that carbon is being released at an alarming rate. And it's because the keystone species, the mammoths, don't exist anymore. And what they do is they literally, by pounding the ground with their feet, they lock in carbon. That's really what they're doing. And so George Church, who's one of the co-creators of CRISPR and probably everybody's vote for the smartest synthetic biologist in the world, he's at Harvard, saying, oh, you could solve this problem by bringing the woolly mammoth back from the dead. And, you started thinking about it, working on it a little bit. And then Ben Lamb was talking to George Church, heard about this, stayed up all night, and he did exactly what you did. He went, oh my God, Jurassic Park, right? Like, let's do this. And he sold the idea to investors. I mean, a lot of investors, money poured into Colossal, and they brought the direwolf back, made the cover of Time. That was the first species, right? They're working on the dodo. They're working on the woolly mammoth. There are a couple others. Just got announced that they're very close to. I think there's one other species they brought back from the dead that I'm forgetting right now. But anyways, I think like if you're looking for like what's the company that's like most performing miracles, well, I mentioned the Science Corporation and Max Hoduk's brain implant. Ben Lamb and de-extinction is there. There's a lot of others that are wild. Let me, just as another example, sort of talk about the problem I was trying to solve when I came into this book and one of the companies that sits on the other side of this problem, because I think it's also another good example here. So when Peter and I came together to write this book, we started talking about it 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID, a little before COVID, right after Faster had ended. It hadn't come out yet, but we started like just poking at some of the ideas and things like that and still looking at it. Peter was looking at like sort of the numbers I gave you, right? Like the proof of abundance. He was looking at, and Peter is probably more than me, because I think he takes the world more seriously than I do, but he was looking at all the negative news, CNN, the Crisis News Network, and how pessimistic the world had become. And it's like, they don't get the data. Like the data is overwhelming. We've been tracking it since abundance. If you just like look at the numbers, the stats are everywhere and they're astounding. And he was right. And I kept saying, okay, that's fine. But we've now got these problems of abundance that come with abundance, right? I said, we've got an abundance of intelligence, an abundance of smartness in the world. It's a miracle. And it's got an abundance of fears of technological unemployment or rogue AI or take your pick, right? Like, so dark side of abundance, I was looking at a lot of the issues on the dark side of abundance, whether it's environmental collapse or rogue AI or take your pick. And I realized the way to solve them was we have to learn how to cooperate at scale. That's a hard problem. And I call it the last mile on the road to abundance, using the analogy that comes out of telecom. But more to the point, the only time in history when humans have ever managed to cooperate at scale is when there's like a war or a sporting event. Those are the only two times we really do it at a global level. And so I was looking at this problem as sort of a really big problem, but it was like, it didn't seem solvable. It didn't feel like there was any viable solution that I could convince anybody was going to work or even, think about it. And then COVID happened. And suddenly we see the world cooperate like never before, across borders, across scientists, sharing data, and the result of the fastest vaccine development in history. And you can, whatever you think about the vaccines, I don't care. It doesn't matter. That's not part of this argument. The point is that the world worked together. We got, like, I believe the number is 17 different vaccines for COVID and COVID variants by the time it was all said and done. That number could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. That's amazing. That's amazing. That was proof of concept and technologically enabled. So that was really neat. The technology in the company I want to talk about is what's on the other half of that. So I run the Flow Research Collective, where we study the neuroscience, the neurobiology of peak human performance. So what's going on in the brain and body when people perform at their best? We do this in individuals, we do this in groups, and we work all over the world. We've trained people and done research in 156 countries, 28 industries. My chief science officer is a guy named Michael Menino, and Michael and another friend of ours founded a company. I've joined their board. It's called Synergy. And what Synergy does is it literally is techno-enabled cooperation at a neurobiological level. That's a mouthful. Synergy, by the way, is SYNEURGY.com. If you're looking, it's synchrony and neuron put together. I didn't name the company, but you can send Synergy a recording of a Zoom call you had with your team, and using AI somatic analysis, pupillometry, so various things that your pupil is doing and what that means in the brain, and a vein in your forehead that can give you heart rate and a bunch of other stuff that can be read through infrared. We can get things like real-time trust, real-time psychological safety, and each participating member, we can give you synchrony, brain entrainment, physiological entrainment. So these are all amazing predictors of heightened attention, heightened team performance, heightened shared risk taking, creativity, like all this. And by the way, group flow, which is the ultimate example. That's the biology of cooperation at scale. This we know. This is why I was looking at the problem in the first place. When flow takes place, like when you go to a rock concert and everybody is merged with the band and is clapping in time and one with the music, that's communitas. It's flow at scale. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been studied since like the 1870s, was the early work on communitas. There's 150 years worth of research into it. So we understand how it works. And now we're understanding that we have the technology to cooperate at scale, and we have the technology to enhance cooperation at scale. And if group flow is the ultimate example, work done by colleagues of ours back in 2022 found a distinct neurological signal in the brain for group flow. So, and in the book, one of the things you read about was Mary Lou Jepson's Blue Water, which is sort of a portable, it's basically portable fMRI. It uses ultrasound. She's using it to replace fMRI brain scans, which are very expensive, right? She wants to basically democratize. That's the one portion of diagnostic medicine that really hasn't been democratized. It's super expensive still. So that's what she's going after. But her technology, for example, would be one way of getting at that group flow signal. So the point is that, like, suddenly in 5 years, this problem that was, what is more biblical than love thy neighbor as thyself, than cooperate at scale? Like, this is literally the biblical, not only the miracle point, right? This is the point. This is the message in all of the wisdom traditions. And we actually have the technology to make that real, like across the boards. And we've seen it, and this is not hypothetical. This is actually in the lab. This is in the world. You could like go to synergy.com and sign up and, get those kind of, and it's, amazing for companies. Like if you get a report about like, at this point in the meeting, John's attention fell out. Now you don't know if John's attention fell out because like his sister just entered treatment or because of, something you said exactly, but it's a hell of a lot more steering than you had before. And you could at least have the conversation with John kind of thing. So, talked for a while. Those are the examples that spring to mind. I'll pass it over back to you. Like, did I say enough? Do you want more?
Well, towards the end of your book, you talk about the intelligence explosion. That's about midway through your book. And of course, that fits in with the theme that you've been discussing in Bold and Abundance with exponential technologies. And, just as we discussed with you 10 years ago in Bold, we were talking about artificial intelligence and how that is going to proceed moving forward. People aren't ready for it. That was still, I would say most people at that time were thinking AI was sci-fi, even 10 years ago. And here we are. Clearly, it's not sci-fi, it is reality. And I would say the big idea for me in reading your book is that we are seeing this explosion now with, like you're saying, harnessing the brain and merging technology with the brain. That's towards the near end of your book. You're talking about mostly there, I think, non-invasive procedures, but we're seeing an explosion in the use of invasive BMIs, brain-machine interfaces. From my perspective, given what you guys write about in your book and what we see in terms of the trends taking place, that's really where we're going to see a huge, huge development over the next 10 years. If we were to fast forward another 10 years, where I think now you're talking about not just the resolution or restoration of people, whether or not that is with people that have paraplegia or various disorders that can be alleviated or resolved, but now brain augmentation. I think that that's really going to be the next step. And you do touch upon that in your book. And according to what you say, many of the people that you interviewed in your book believe superintelligence is coming. ASI, artificial superintelligence, it's coming over the next 10 years or so. The only way to survive that is to merge with.
The book, in certain cases, merges opinions. So Peter's opinion, my opinion, we're looking for common ground. I think everything you just said, I think almost everything you just said is true. And it's going to happen. I think the time horizons are wrong. And let me clarify. And this is the reason so much of the book talks about flow, because I think flow is the gap technology, but I think it's going to fill a much bigger gap. So let me speak into a handful of things a bunch of different ways. So let's just start with AI progress, which is it's blazing fast, but it's a lot slower than most people assume. So we've been taught, everybody's talking about fear, scared of technological unemployment, and they don't actually know what the data is. The data says right now, if you're using frontier model AI agents to autonomously complete tasks, no humans needed, they can do about 2.5% like paid real world projects. And this is a study done by the Center for AI Safety. Trust more so. This is the number that everybody gets wrong. You ask most people, many people have lost their jobs to AI. You hear hundreds of thousands to millions. That's the standard answer. It's usually the millions these days. The truth in the US is 17,000 people have lost their jobs to AI, period. Like that's it. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, especially because there's millions of jobs that are normally lost each year during transitions. And the reason is AI isn't going to take our job. It does tasks. Are like skills and judgment and trust and communication and laws and culture and institutions and like they're big things. AI can do tasks. It's pretty good at some tasks. It's not great at others. And as a general rule, I don't think technology is going to steal your job. It doesn't historically. It reorganizes work a lot. And I tend to think it usually ends up in the end creating more technologies and doesn't. And Ben Lamb is that great example in the book. We kind of give you a job board, everything that comes off of rewilding. And there's dozens of new jobs that have never existed in the world before because we can de-extinct species. So I want to slow down some of that. I also think that there are bunch of big problems with LLMs that are not going to get resolved by LLMs. And I think this was a minority opinion 6 months ago. This is, I think, the majority opinion at this point. I'm not seeing any, and I'm seeing other problems that other people aren't noticing because of the work I do in neuroscience. But I think that those things are true. Now let's talk about the BCI side for a second, the brain computer interface. This is, you said, like you collapsed timetables. So you said we're going to, the paralyzed are going to walk again, right? Those sorts of things. Those are real biblical miracles. Those are freaking amazing. Those are going to happen this decade, I believe. With BCI, we're very close. Technologies are coming into the market. This is moving forward. Is it going to be possible with like a total spinal collapse? Like the extreme edges, maybe not. It may not be into the 10-year time horizon, but for sure, I think that's a very accurate statement.
Well, you need a robotic exoskeleton, I would say.
Yeah. Those are like, I don't know if you've seen any of the exoskeletons. Those are also, all the robotic stuff is and the AI stuff is moving just as fast. So those things are coming too. For sure. Where there are BCI problems, and this is the difference between neuroscientists talking about BCI and technologists talking about BCI. This was my comment earlier about Elon Musk, and I think Musk has made a bunch of statements in public that are just not true, and he made a bunch of promises about Teslas that are still not. We don't have level 5 automation, right? He promised that your Tesla is going to be able to drive cross country. It's parked in Miami, and it's going to be able to drive across country and like end up in your LA, garage without you. No, we're nowhere close to those things. And no, in 2020, when he told the world that in April 2020, there will be no new cases of COVID next month, that didn't work out so well, right? Like, so he's made some predictions that are not real. And the BCI ones bother me a lot because maybe this is my field, but also because I think a lot of people are thinking what you're thinking, which is, oh, wow, technology is coming to save me. And it's not. And here's why. This is, by the way, why Max Hodak left Elon Musk company and founded Neuralink. His chief scientist left and founded a new company. And the reason is it doesn't matter brain up to the internet. Even if I can do it, even if I can take in those signals, the bandwidth of attention is 120 bits wide. That's two people talking in a faucet. That's literally the bandwidth of attention. The bandwidth of working memory, all the shit you can think about at once, for most people, it's about 4 concepts. You can possibly train it up to about 5, and then you're overloaded. Authors who are juggling books, the chapters all the time, can usually hold a few more. Like, there's ways to train your brain to hold a little bit more, but you run out of memory slots 9 completely, and that's usually only for single digits. So, and as I said, most people literally tap out and get cognitive overload and can't think anymore. 3 concepts. It doesn't matter. And nobody has any idea. Great memory. We don't know how to fix the bandwidth of attention. We don't know how to shift it. We don't know how to upgrade memory. These are massive downstream problems on the human side of the interface. So can we feed the data into the brain? Yes. Will the brain probably figure out something to do with it? There is evidence that it might. David Eagleman's work, he's done a lot of work on sensory substitution, shows that like we have some innate advantages here, but we don't, even his work with cochlear implants, we thought we were going to get perfect hearing. They didn't. Even after like years, it tunes, but they don't, this thing that they miss, there's whole gaps. Technology drives most people really crazy. It's frustrating. It's better than being deaf, my understanding, and talking to deaf people, but it's not. It's very frustrating. It's sort of a little bit like, working with your LLM today, maybe a little bit worse, but it's like that. Yeah, they'll improve. This stuff will improve. But these are really big problems in neuroscience. Now, our understanding of neuroscience, the technology to look in the brain, all that stuff is also advancing. So I tend to be a little cautious about this because I've been in the field for a really long time, and it's moved a lot slower than I thought. But I also, if you would have come to me 20 years ago and told me that like a technology like Synergy that I just told you about would exist, I would have laughed. Everybody in the field would have laughed. Like, we would have all like, no, that's never going to be possible, not in our lifetime. And sure enough, here we are. So I could be wrong about stuff, but what I think is the gap between we can use BCIs to really treat illness and disability versus our brains with the internet is larger than most people. But there's stuff we're doing that's, you know, sort of incredible and wild, like Meta's work, for example, on silent speech. Silent speech is the voice in your head. So they have a non-invasive technology that is literally reading the micro expressions in your face, pupillometry, a couple of the other things we were reading for Synergy, and they can reconstruct at this point using sort of LLMs 70% of silent speech. So they can read the voice in your head off physical. So that is ESP. That's techno-enabled ESP. That's another biblical miracle or whatever you want, a mystical. I don't even know what it is. It's a X-Men power. Let's call it an X-Men power, right? So there is stuff that is interesting in the. I don't want to naysay any of the neurotech revolution because it's amazing, but we're going to be able to like plug the AI and the internet directly into our brain and interact with it. Is it going to happen? Yes, I think it's absolutely going to happen. Do I think it's going to happen soon? No, I don't. I see a 20-year time horizon on that one, if not more. I could be wrong, but not anything most of the other neuroscientists I know and work with disagree with. Most neuroscientists look at these problems and go, whoa, slow down on the timetable. No, some people have, and Peter and I sort of tried, we had differences of opinions. Peter is this is going to happen much faster, but he spends more time talking to technologists than neuroscientists. And I'm in I don't know. But I'm trained as a reporter and trained as a scientist. Like I am professionally skeptical, and which is why Peter and I make a good pairing. But if you're asking me these questions, I got to give you my honest opinion and not his.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally understand. The way I look at it is you just look at what we've already seen happen with either Neuralink or Synchron, the various different types of brain machine, brain computer interface companies out there. They're seeing just massive strides in what they're capable of doing. And of course, they're working on resolving disabilities with people. And the people that have these disabilities, who have had these brain machine interfaces installed, they already, like you said, have the powers of essentially telepathy, ESP, being able to communicate directly with a computer through their thoughts. So, I mean, what's to say, take away the disability, and now all of a sudden you're upgrading a whole bunch of people
Oh yeah,
with
yeah.
the
I mean,
technology.
you gotta like this is so. What's interesting here is you gotta stop on this one and just like take the historical perspective. This isn't even me saying this. Andy Card has been saying this for 25 years. You're already bionic. You're wearing technology on your eyes, right? You're wearing but you've already sort of brought this into your system, and we're seeing more and more of this. So this is something. I think we talked about it in Faster a little bit. There's this weird thing in psychology where every generation wants to sort of like out rebel the previous generation. It's called the rebel instinct. So this is why beatniks, you had people who were rebelling. They were wearing black leather jackets and they were doing some drugs and they were riding motorcycles. Then you got to the hippies and it was a little more outlandish. Now the clothes had gotten really flamboyant and the hair got really long. It was a bigger modification. And then you went to the punks and they started adding tattoos and piercings, and now the body's being modified. You go 10 years later where it's sort of like metal grunge rave, like whatever that world is, new metal, that era, the 90s and 2000s. You've got scarification. You've got like all kinds of tattoos, facial tattoos, like right? It's and then, even though people don't like when I say this, the next step is literally the transgender movement, where you're literally totally switching your sexuality, and doing permanent like alter in your body. The step after that, we're starting to see, which is what you're talking about. People are already starting to, biohackers especially, take
Biohacking,
technology into their body in really weird ways, right? You're getting technologies that are directly being implanted in the bodies, and it's getting, it's going up and up and up. I was I got to hang out with Yu Hare at MIT's biomechatronics labs when literally the world's first bionic soldier was born. His name was David Rizal, Captain David Rizal. And he was the first soldier to get a bionic ankle. That was like the ankle is one of the most complicated body parts imaginable. It was an amazing feat. And I think he went out and ran an Ironman with it,
Wow.
like to prove that it worked. And so this is getting more and more extreme, but I think what people are missing is like sort of the cultural drive. There's like this punk rock rebel cultural driver sort of like woven through the biohacking community. And you're starting to see, and you're seeing some of the more extreme examples in longevity also, where people are radical experiments in longevity are being conducted all over the world right now
Yeah,
by
injecting peptides into
billionaires
their.
near you. I've been injecting peptides. Those aren't that new. They're doing a lot
Okay, yeah.
more extreme stuff. In fact, I put stem cells in my knee 2 days ago.
Did it make a difference, or is it
Yeah,
making a difference?
So if you want to understand where longevity technology is, we cover this in the book. Peter is more ambitious for the timeline of longevity technology than I am. Again, I think we're moving in these directions. I think it's going to be slower, and I can give you my reasons for it. But when it comes to stem cells, I'm one of the first people, by the way, to heal a broken back with stem cells. I'm a catastrophic action sports disaster. Sometimes broken everything a bunch of times.
This was you?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
so I exploded my L3, 4, and 5.
Wow.
Just exploded them. And we, over the course of about 2 years, I rebuilt them themselves. I didn't explode the vertebrae. The vertebrae stayed intact. So that's a big difference. That's a very big difference. Where it seems like we are is tendons, ligament, cartilage, and just at the edge of cartilage, right? We're just there about where things are. We're going to see regulatory approvals over the next month, 2 months, 3 months. By July, I think it's 7 more peptides are scheduled to be approved. So a lot of this stuff is moving very quickly in interesting ways. Some of the peptides are amazing. What we've seen, weight loss and things like that. And my wife and I run a hospice care dog sanctuary. I don't know if you know that I do this, but we do hospice care for old dogs. So I've been actually involved on cutting edge longevity stuff with canines for a very long time. And we use there's a canine shows up in Doberman's, a canine version of ALS. Well, it shows up in Doberman's, and we've been using peptides very successfully. One of our dogs is sick with it. So seeing it in humans, I've seen some of this stuff in humans. Some of this stuff I don't think is as far along as people want to say, or the individual variation in reactions. The cool thing is I'm also involved in a company that is, I want to say it actually launches. It's a peptide company with very big, second biggest compounder in America, but it's got an IRB at the top. So everybody becomes an N-to-1 data sample. For the first time, we're going to have dual IRB reviewable data, treatments, protocols, conditions, everything, which this will really push this along further. But I think bones, tendons, and ligaments are real. I think anything else that people are telling you right now is very speculative. And I will say, this is where I disagree with a lot of longevity people, because I've been at this longer, as I've broken so many bones and have been dealt with a lot of illnesses over the course of my life. I've literally been experimenting myself since the 90s. So I'm a lot longer in this than a lot of people. And I will tell you that the hit rate, successes in this field, 20% of what we're looking at is useful here 10 years later. Not nearly as useful as people think, but useful. 60% of it is nonsense, and the remaining 20% is often deadly and dangerous. And this is what we've seen. Now, do I think those percentages are going up because AI accelerating, because of all these things? Yes, the percentage, but it would be a historical anomaly for us to suddenly get to longevity, escape velocity, or some of these other big predictions, these very accelerated timetables. There's this crazy statement. It's in the book, and Peter and I argued a lot over it, so I just got to diss it whenever I get a chance, even though it's in the book because he won. But Dennis Havanopoulos, who won a Nobel Prize, makes this statement that I think is insane, where he says AI is going to cure all diseases over the next 10 years. I just think that's the silliest thing I've ever heard out loud. I think people are like counting on that for some of the longevity stuff. And I like that stuff like that sort of makes me nervous. Do I think we're going to live? Do I think I'm going to be 150? I don't. But do I think I could get to 100, 110? Yeah, I do. I think there is going to be a radical expansion in longevity, and these things are coming, but soon how fast complete, and far down just the rabbit hole goal. The other question, I've pointed this out to a lot of people, which is right now we are sort of believing that there's not a mechanistic level of evidence we're going to need to uncover. But We've thought DNA was going to be the secret to life. And no, it turns out it's not. Epigenetics plays a role. Proteomics plays another. The connectome in the brain plays a role. The microbiome plays a role. Just listed the data we now are working with, even though epigenetics is very not well understood at all, not well cared. Neither are many of the others. Everybody's betting there's not another explanatory level. We solve these things and we're going to get it. And there's no proof of that. The proof is that every time we think we got it, there's another mechanistic level. And we all know that there's a quantum level. We know that. Like, we know that exists. Quantum medicine is I think, a non sequitur. I think when most people use the word quantum physics, what they really mean is magic fairy dust. Right? Like, I don't think most people actually have any idea what they're talking about. I don't think I know what I'm talking about most of the time. And so, like, I'm very, very cautious about using those words, though I will say I'm a distinguished research fellow at Florida Atlantic University in the Center for Complex Systems and Brain Sciences, and we are the only institution in the world with a D-Wave quantum computer. So, which is very cool. So, like, I get, I am wary of using the word quantum, and I actually get, have access to the technologies themselves. So I'm wary about how much we know at a mechanistic level. Like, what do we actually know? I don't know what we know. I don't think we know what we know. Nor do I think we know what we need to know to make progress in some of the things we're up against. I think we're going to do all these things. I'm not sure about the timeline, but I always say I'm trained as a reporter and a scientist. So, like, my job is to look at what we know and tell you what I think is real. This is what I think truth is. Now, it's scientific truth. So that's like small t most of the time, right? Like, this is what the best evidence of what we know right now. I don't tend to prognosticate. I think that's a futurist job. I don't see myself as a futurist. I think that's above my pay grade. I think that's above most people's pay grades. I think if you want to call yourself a futurist, like when Ray Kurzweil does it, go, yes, the dude made 80, 128 predictions or whatever it was, and he's like 86% dead accurate. Like 10% he was wrong about, like, the timeline a little bit, but it's still
The
you know what I
trajectory
mean?
is correct. Yeah. Great hit rate.
The dude hasn't missed. Yeah, if Ray wants to call himself, I was just with Ray a couple weeks ago, and I said,
Oh, cool.
like, when Ray calls himself a futurist, you go, yes, you said it. It's real. It's like the guy. I'm a football fan. Every year I watch people make, like, draft predictions, and it's amazing to me that, like, every year it's the same people that go on national television. They say things with absolute authority. None of them happen. And a year later, they go back on television and they say more things. None of them happen. It's Daniel Kahneman made an entire career on, like, the illusion of validity and all these other, like, cognitive biases that show up every year listening to sports people, let alone people trying to predict things like this is like who's going to win a game. Like, it's a bounded set of rules. We know there are a set number of teams. Like, that's my solvable problem, because you can at least identify all the variables on a certain level. Try doing that one level of scale out, and you quickly see why I think futurism is a silly pastime, unless you're doing what Kurzweil did, which is actually plotting exponential growth curves.
Right. There's one aspect of your book, or there's so many different areas that you go into that I really enjoy, but something that you said that just spurred me to think about this is you talk about the abundance of information, right? So we live in an age of abundance, that's very clear, and the fact that there's so much information that's available. And you talk about, of course, there's the upsides of abundance, and then there's the downsides of abundance. One of the downsides that you get into that I thought was very interesting, because it helps understand why we see such a level of polarization in society today. And that's when you get into how our brains respond to this information overload through what's called a bias cascade. Can you get into that for us?
Yeah, I mean, bias cascade is one version of this. There's a lot of others. Let me give you, so the bias cascade is simply the idea that we have cognitive biases, a lot of them top each other. We have confirmation bias, big problem with social media, which we believe stuff that confirms our hypothesis, and we naysay, and that doesn't. This tends to create tribalism. We have a negativity bias. We're privileged negative information way more than we privilege positive information. And this is extra problematic today because our analogies are failing and people are defaulting to binaries, right? Utopia or apocalypse kind of thinking. And you get a lot more negative and we're already biased to the negative. That's problematic. Also problematic because bias towards the negative, we're only taking in negative information. That's usually stuff we already sort of know about. Oh, the apocalypse is coming about. Like we know that stuff. It's crowding out novel information. Novelty is the seed of creativity and innovation. The stuff we would need to think our way out of these problems is being crowded out by the negativity bias. There's loss aversion, which is this idea that whatever you have today, if I take it away, if I give you something so much better, you are going to resist because you aren't going to believe it. But here's the real issue that comes off of this, worse than the bias cascade, but it's another cascade. It comes right off of information overload. And I have nicknamed this nickname, exponential leadership syndrome. And it's because when I first saw it for the first 6 months, it was in leaders, people, CEOs, people running major companies or founders. And then I started to realize, oh shit, it's just that I've been around founders and leaders, actually everyone, right? And it was like my own bias, like it was literally a confirmation bias. Like I was around founders and leaders, and I was seeing it there. So, anyways, information overload produces cognitive overload. We know this, like too much information coming in, suddenly your brain's overloaded, fractures attention. I don't know what to pay attention to anymore. Once attention is fractured, decision fatigue sets in. I don't know how to make decisions. There's too many choices. I don't even know what to focus on. That starts to do some really interesting things. The first thing it starts to do is it produces what psychologists talk about as meaning drift. And we've all experienced this, right? Stuff that used to mean a lot doesn't anymore, and things that we don't quite know what means what anymore. It's fuzzier than it was sort of pre-AI years ago. And we're all, I think, feeling this now. Meaning drift is really interesting because when meaning starts to shift in this way, we tend to contract, we tend to get scared. All these things kind of up fear, basically, because we're less capable, right? When your attention is fractured, when you can't make decisions, when meaning is starting to wobble, like these are anchors of performance. And when performance is eroded, like our survival instincts kick in and we're like, oh shit, I can't meet the challenge of the day. Once you've got that much fear in the system, it erodes creativity, motivation, and resilience. Now, this skill erosion leads directly to burnout, which is why burnout is at an all-time high in the world right now. This is where it gets really weird. This I hadn't seen before. I've been working flow overwrites burnout. This is sort of well known. So I've worked on burnout for a really long time. Like when people come to train with the Flow Research Collective and me, burnout is one of the top reasons. And, it's really funny. I was talking to my teammate today. He's in our sales department, and he said he was talking to. We have a program coming up with CEO weekends where we just basically it's CEOs and their teams, and we train them up at all the like flow, creativity, all these skills that you really need in the 21st century. Anyways, when I talk to CEOs, they'll always say, my team is burned out. What they really mean is I'm burned out. And I was like, started laughing. I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. But anyways, people are so burned out. We're seeing adaptive rigidity. I'm out of options. Literally, I'm out of options. I'm like a victim. But you see this a lot with AI. People are like, the AI tsunami is coming, and I can't do anything. I'm paralyzed. Then you get performance theater, which you see a lot. This is people going through the motions. This was a big deal right after when we returned to work. We sort of returned to work, but we weren't there, and we started faking it. And a lot of people haven't because of this information overload, because of what's going on in the world. And the end of this is identity collapse. Who the fuck am I? That is more and more sort of everywhere. I mean, I think any tour through social media to pick your, Twitter, TikTok, and all that, to pick your poison, is really a tour of like exponential leadership syndrome in various forms on display, both causes and, and outcomes. So I like, this is one of the reasons I think We Are as Gods is really important, right? It's a survival guide for the age of abundance. So all the things that we're talking about there, the second half of the book is like, here's how you use flow. Here's how you use, mindset. Here's how you use technology to like, these are not soft. We say that softer skills in the 20th century, meaning making, curiosity, flow, creativity, they're hard skills in the 21st century. hard on a number of they're the core skills we need for work, core skills we need to teach our children, the core skills we need for thriving. They're also being eroded. They weren't being eroded in the 20th century. In the 21st century, they're actually being eroded. AI, and for a lot, cognitive impact of AI is colossal. I don't think we're right for it. And so it's going to take everything I've just said and magnify it hundredfold. Cognitive offloading, which is the very familiar part of this story to most people, is only sort of the beginning of that story. There's a list of 12 things that are that it's doing to our brain. Cognitive offloading is one of them. They're all really bad. The weirdest one is I keep seeing more and more examples of this is we see this. So I always tell people that are giving speeches, don't put videos in your speech. Because you show an audience a video and then you start talking to them afterwards with no video, you don't move fast enough. They're bored. This is the same thing that happens with AI. So if you work with your AI in the morning, right? Then you probably did before we got on this call. Now you got on this call. This is an analog call compared to that. You're less motivated. Your motivation has dropped off compared to what it was. The AI intrinsic motivation for non-digital tasks completely destroyed by AI.
Again, the book is We Are as Gods, co-written by Peter Diamandis and Steven Kotler. We've been speaking with Steven Kotler about it. Steven, it was a pleasure. We look forward to having you on the show again.
Thanks
All
for
right,
having
man.
me. Appreciate you. See you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye.